Good morning to everyone. We're ready to start day 5 of this hearing. Let's start with the mini openings. Are there any things to report? Is there anything to report on the claimant's side or presentations you'd like to make? There's 2 points that the tribunal thought we should address today. Any news from Mr. Avidan, if there is any, and then maybe we should also briefly discuss the timing of next week. Otherwise, of course, we're in your hands with respect to any topics you wish to raise now.
Madam President, members of the Tribunal, good morning. We were only going to raise one point, which was that of Mr. Avidan. The position is that, having spoken to Mr. Avidan, he will appear before the tribunal. I've been told by the Mishcon team, if I can put it that way, that what they propose to do is, having spoken to Mr. Avidan, they're going to approach counsel for the respondents and try to sort out the scheduling of that. I'm afraid I'm not personally able to help the tribunal today on the scheduling. I think what's being floated is that rather than interrupt the Guinean witnesses, I think, as we said earlier, we'd try to look at having Mr. Avidan on Thursday at some point. But having said what I've said, could I leave the scheduling to be discussed between the usual channels? And I hope that on Monday the parties would be able to either have an agreed position or at least explain the position to the tribunal. But the main point is he will be able to appear.
That is indeed good news, and thank you for having, to the claimants, for having done what was needed. Ideally, if the claimants confirm that they will end the cross-examination of the Guinean witnesses by Wednesday, end of the day, then we could take Mr. Avidan on Thursday morning.
Yes, I hear what Madam President says. I don't mean to be difficult in any way, but I personally am not going to be doing the cross-examinations of the Guinean witnesses, and so I'm not able to confirm how long precisely that will take. What Madame President has said will, of course, have been seen by those who are preparing the cross-examinations, and I hope that either over the weekend or on Monday morning there'll be an agreed position. But I see the force of what's just been said. Equally, I don't want to limit, by saying something now, the time which those doing the cross-examinations may think they need for them.
Absolutely. Right now, the cross-examinations are scheduled for longer. And
precisely.
Absolutely. So, you can confirm and counsel over the weekend, and then see how you best organize this. We have full confidence in your
sure
organizational skills.
I'm sure there's a way to sort this out.
Fine. That is all you had to raise at this point.
Yes, I think the only thing was respectfully to remind the tribunal that the free report issue is still, to use the phrase, in limbo. I don't know whether the tribunal wanted me to address that, but I think I said all I wanted to say about it yesterday, and I think the issue at the moment is with the tribunal as I understood it.
That is how I understand it, that it's a little premature for the tribunal to revert to you with a decision, but it will do so. I don't think it should affect the examination of Mr. Ferreira.
I can't say it has any impact on that. Unless the tribunal would be assisted by anything further from me, that's all I was going to say this morning.
That is fine, nothing further from the tribunal. Est-ce que je peux passer la parole à la...
And the President, respondent, you have the floor. Mr. Ostrov, we're very pleased that Mr. Avidan can testify, and we do hope that we'll find a solution quickly regarding the actual timing of his hearing. This morning we will be hearing Mr. Ferreira. expert for the claimant. Just to give a little bit of background on his testimony, he talked about the role of a local partner in a mining project, and he talks about the viability of the development of the Simandou deposit in current market conditions. The issue of the project's viability claims to be tied in with our counterclaims. Because we have not addressed our counterclaim on Monday, I simply wanted to give a framework for our two counterclaims. We are asking a reparation for moral prejudice because of the prejudicial communication by BSGR. And Mr. Ferreira's testifying has no impact on this. And the economic prejudice caused by BSGR. First, BSGR are not challenging the competence of the tribunal to address counterclaims. So is there no problem in this respect, as we have said in our counter memorial in paragraph 1129 to 1131. Concerning the economic prejudice caused by corruption, Guinea has a loss of revenue that is huge because of the late putting into operation of the disputed deposits that are a direct result of the fraudulent actions of BSGR. The quantum of prejudice is to be addressed in a second phase, and no representation has been made regarding this by the parties. As to the principle concerning the Simandou deposit, because there is the Simandou deposit and there is the Zogota deposit, BSGR has a tremendous impact and the alleged corruption regarding this deposit. In 2010, Rio Tinto's mining rights were withdrawn because there had not been the legally mandated retrocession by Rio Tinto. And this was not challenged for Guinea. This was also a major problem, and this led to a dispute with Rio Tinto on the grounds of this non-retrocession and the withdrawal of the mining rights, and after long negotiations, a settlement agreement. In the midst of this, rather than having negotiated a retrocession with Rio Tinto, although negotiations had been undertaken so that Rio Tinto could decide which part of its blocks 1 through 4 would be retroceded, the retrocession was forced and imposed by the state. Says, we're taking everything back, we're giving you back blocks 3 and 4, and actually they immediately turned around and gave blocks 1 and 2 to BSGR. And it's BSGR's intercession that basically created the problems over the blocks. If BSGR had not committed fraud, if they had not entered into their memorandum of understanding in 2006, saying that as soon as the blocks would be available, they would be taking up blocks 1 and 2. And everything they did, not just what Mr. Strook said yesterday, and had BSGR not interfered at that point, then the negotiations with Rio Tinto would not have been cut short. Rio Tinto could have conducted the retrocession in accordance with their mining plan, as we called it yesterday. And Rio Tinto could have resumed its work in 2010. Instead of that, there followed 3 years of various upheavals, and Rio Tinto attempted in 2011, following its settlement with the state, to resume its activities. And as Monsieur Ferreira says, by 2012, market conditions had changed considerably, and the situation was vastly different from 2008. The years 2011, 2012 were absolutely crucial to develop the funding for the Trans-Guinean Railway, not the one that BSGR had proposed. That was not at all appropriate for shipping mineral ore. But what Rio Tinto was considering doing, which was a heavy railway which could have helped to ship the ore from Simandou. So BSGR's arguments in defense are inoperative. We have addressed this in our reply, starting with paragraph 472, so I shall be brief in my comments this morning. According to their expert, Mr. Ferreira, the Simandou project is not viable. We must say that what Mr. Ferreira is talking about is simply unrelated to what we're saying. He is saying that the project would not be viable in present market conditions, and he is looking at the situation as of 2015, 2016. Thus, his report on these issues is simply irrelevant, so he is simply misunderstanding our counterclaims. And I might note in passing that even at this stage, Guinea contests, and even beyond this arbitration, that the Simandou ore deposit is not viable. Not to go into too much detail, there's a tremendous infrastructure investment required, as Mr. Strook said, to ship the ore. But the mining work and operations in Simandou is extremely easy because the grade of the ore is a very high quality because it's close to the surface. And of course, we don't need to go into the detail, however interesting it may be to the experts. Then, if you just take recent press reports and you have Exhibit R569 that says that Chinalco, that was also mentioned by Mr. Strook, was interested at the time and was in talks with BSGR. Well, Chinalco is negotiating today because even in current market conditions, it wants to mine blocks 1 and 2. And we fail to understand why BSGR would have asked this tribunal to have its mining rights returned to it if BSGR considers today that the project is no longer viable. This is an absolutely blatant contradiction between what their expert is saying and what BSGR is claiming. In any event, this is not relevant. Our position was that if BSGR had not fraudulently conducted itself in 2005, 2006, 2008, even further to that, there would not have been a dispute, and two things could have happened. Either if BSGR had come in as a good investor without engaging in acts of corruption, rather than if it had presented itself as a good investor by going out and getting the proper technical competence, everybody would be happy today. BSGR would be a good investor in Guinea. BSGR itself claims that it would have been profitable, and there would have been money to be made by all parties, including the state, and the situation would have been ideal. But if BSGR was not able to come in without engaging in corruption, there were other investors. And we have this on the file. There were other investors who were interested in looking at blocks 1 and 2 as early as 2008, and the situation would have been entirely different. The second line of defense of BSGR is something that I can review quickly. If Guinea has lost something, it's Guinea's fault, because it manufactured these alleged acts of corruption, these charges of corruption. This is their conspiracy theory. That's their defense. It's basically being recycled, and it's a little bit difficult to understand this. They're saying even if we engage in corruption, there's no loss, because in any event, the losses are or Guinea is to be blamed for the losses, because they're the ones who trumped up the corruption charges. We need not scrutinize this. We know that there's absolutely no evidence of this conspiracy theory. Is entirely absurd to think that George Soros and President Condé agreed to corrupt individuals to buy the election. And we have even exhibits that go back to 2009 that explain things very clearly, including Mr. Ball's letter. And the idea that in any fashion whatsoever, George Soros and the President Condé did something in 2009 to actually plant all these this corruption evidence in the file. All of this is absurd. Finally, I'd like to say something about the Zogota deposit. So the loss of production on Zogota and the late start of production is something that we address this in our rejoinder from 1040 to 1042. And why did we deal with this in a very cursory fashion? It's because BSGR did not even take the trouble to address this in their own reply. They're not challenging the fact that there's a prejudice on Zogota, and BSGR claims that it would have started production in 2012 had they been an investor in good faith with a real technical capability. We know that it would have been doable. One last thing regarding the conservatory measures that have not been quantified. They have not been quantified because we know that the late beginning of mining only in Simandou, without even taking into account taxes, we're talking about 750 to 1 billion in prejudice sustained by the state. And if Mr. Ferreira is right, and you can't go to market with this because it's no longer viable because 6 to 8 years have been lost. But it should be possible to market it 6 or 8 years later. But if he is right and it's not viable, and the state, as a result of BSGR's act of corruption, cannot market this and has to wait another 10, 20, 30 years, in that case, Mr. Ferreira, in effect, has proven that the damages for Guinea are much higher than what we are claiming. Fortunately, we believe that he is wrong on this score, but that is not of our concern today. And that's all I wanted to say about counterclaims before beginning with Mr. Ferreira's cross-examination. Thank you. The President, thank you.
Fine, so I think that concludes the mini openings, and we can start now with the examination of Mr. Ferreira. Can I ask you to take a seat at the witness table, please.
Pardon, c'est juste pour vérifier qu'on a assez de copies de dossier pour indiquer.
I just want to make sure that in the documents that are being handed out, it should be indicated when the documents are confidential so that we don't need to interrupt proceedings later on.
Sorry, I'll switch into English. So, because the interpretation, either I misspoke or the interpretation was a little confused. We were just making sure we had enough copies of the bundle so that when we follow along, we can indicate when there are confidential sections, and we didn't want to create delay later by having to stop all the time to check.
Good, are we ready to start? On the respondent side, are we now? Looks like we are. Good. Mr. Ferreira, good morning. Thank you for being with us and for having waited yesterday. For the record, can you please confirm to us that you're François Ferreira?
That's correct.
I wasn't sure from reading your report, are you still the CEO of African Resources Holding?
No, I'm not the CEO. I'm an investor in that business. That was a vehicle that was looking at new opportunities, but I continue to work within the resources space and advising clients in this space.
Are you the principal of a given company, or are you acting
I have
in your
a small
personal
consultation company of my own.
name? What is the name of this company?
Alimax.
Alimax.
Yeah.
Thank you. You have provided us with one expert report dated 7th of January 2017. Is that right?
That's correct.
You have your report with you
I do.
in an unmarked copy?
It's a clean copy, and I've just flicked through it, and this is the correct version.
Good. You're heard as an expert in this arbitration. As an expert, you're under a duty to make only such statements in accordance with your sincere belief. Can you please confirm your understanding of this duty by reading the expert declaration? Now I see the secretary will come and help you. There is a witness and there is an expert declaration, so you should take the right one.
Can I read it?
Yes, please. You can read it aloud.
I solemnly declare upon my honor and conscience that my statement will be in accordance with my sincere belief.
Thank you. So I'll first turn to the Claimants Council for direct questions, if there are any.
We have no questions in direct.
Thank you. So then I will turn to the respondent. To whom do I give the floor?
Merci Madame le
Mr.
Président.
Schneller.
Je vais procéder à l'interrogatoire de
Volontiers.
Monsieur Ferreira.
Thank you. I'm going to cross Mr. Ferreira.
Morning.
I'm Jan Schneller, and I'm going to ask you some questions on your expert report. Could you please turn to page 7 of your expert report, please? In paragraph 22 to 26, you discuss the use of local partners. And in paragraph 25, you say that a number of entrepreneurs or facilitators with local connections were doing the rounds during this time, offering a number of potential opportunities in almost every African country. You are aware that corruption was very common in Africa at that time, right?
So no, I'm not officially aware of corruption specifically in African countries at the time, other than what was alleged in press throughout the region. And to be fair, internationally, I think corruption is one of the evils of our time, sadly.
What do you mean by local connections?
Somebody who has an understanding of the operations, legal framework, infrastructure, language of a particular country.
Is that the person that you qualify as entrepreneurs or facilitators or local partners?
They could be either of those. Entrepreneurs who may have been engaged in activities in those countries, and as they want to be entrepreneurs looking for new opportunities, even though they might not have expertise. It may be people who have assets themselves, or it may be brokers, for want of a different categorization of it.
So you discuss the use of local partners, but you don't discuss corrupt practices, do you, in your report?
No, I don't.
And you are aware that corruption is often performed by these entrepreneurs or facilitators?
I beg your pardon, can you just repeat that?
You are aware that corruption is often performed by these entrepreneurs or facilitators, aren't you?
No, I'm not aware that specifically there's always corruption performed. I think there's corruption performed in all levels in society. So this is a subset of society. These people were involved in the industry at the time. And so having access or engaging with these people certainly is not synonymous with corruption.
And a company like BSGR knows that corruption is common in Africa, and that the use of local consultants is often associated with corrupt practices, isn't it?
No, I disagree with that. I think that a lot of companies go into Africa and other countries. And I've worked in Eastern Europe, I've worked in Central Europe, I've worked in Asia. There is corruption, sadly, in all levels of society across all industries. This is not specific to Africa. And BSGR or any company going into a new region would look to find the best way to engage in that region with local partners. They don't go in presence of mind that they are going to exploit soft underbelly of corrupt practice. They go in with an entrepreneurial mind, in my view. Certainly that would be my experience of doing so.
And are you aware of the situation in Guinea at the time?
I was aware of Guinea's mineral potential. I was involved in an iron ore business similarly in the Republic of Congo around that time. And Guinea was a country that had a rich mineral potential. From a mineralogical and geological point of view, Guinea is the gift that could keep on giving. It's had bauxite, it had potentially gold up in the north, it had potentially iron ore. So all the potential was there. And so I was aware of Guinea from that perspective, yes.
And you were not aware of the political situation and the fact that corruption was common in Guinea at the time?
So there were allegations of corruption across the continent at the time, whether it was Guinea, DRC, Angola, Zimbabwe, even South Africa. You know, there has sadly always been indications in the press that there's something corrupt going on. I'm not specifically aware of corruption or practices in Guinea at the time. The African countries I was operating in a similar time were also alleged to be involved in corrupt practice, in which I was not specifically, fortunately, seen much of.
And how would a company like BSGR make sure that the use of local consultants, its local consultants, will not be involved in corrupt acts?
I think it would be quite tough to determine that. It's going into a country and finding a partner. The primary objective is to find people who, on a relationship with them, that you can develop a sense of trust. And that sense of trust is how they will deal with you on a one-on-one basis, but also how they're seen to be working and relating to other people in the country. So from my own experience, I would go into a country and try and test potentially their credibility by asking firstly the Ministry of Mines what their view is on the partner, if they'd heard of them, and try and cross-reference them. But other than that, it's really hard to try and determine.
So this requires a careful assessment of the local partner, right?
The careful assessment of the partner, yes, it is principally whether they can facilitate your work in country. As entrepreneurs, you don't go in with a hat of a policeman. You go into the hat of somebody looking for an opportunity to make an earning from and a return on investment of going into the country.
Could you please now turn to page 17 of your expert report, please? In paragraph 57, you say that I see from paragraph 208 to 217 of Guinea's counter memorial that Guinea suggests that it is not credible that Pentler, as in-country partner, should have received a 17.65% interest in BSGR Guinea BVI as compensation for introducing BSGR to Guinea and helping set up BSGR's operations on the ground in 2006. And the first sentence of the next paragraph says that I do not find the grant of a 17.65% shareholding to Pentler at all surprising. So this shareholding is not surprising, right?
No, it's not.
I do not agree with Guinea that the price of $22 million paid by BSGR to acquire Pentler's shareholding in BSGR Guinea was disproportionate. Do you confirm your opinion on this?
Absolutely.
Do you know that this $22 million price for to buy back Pentler's shareholding in BSGR Guinea was negotiated by Mr. Steinmetz?
I have no idea who negotiated. Whoever negotiated this did a good job.
So in your expert opinion, you examined the price paid by BSGR, but have you examined the services rendered by Pentler for this price?
I haven't looked at the services rendered. I don't believe, though, that this price is payable for services rendered. I understand that this was a price paid for acquiring the shares back from Pentler.
But the shares were given for free in exchange for services, right?
Shares were I'm not too sure exactly why the shares were negotiated at the time in this specific case. Let me tell you what the practice was, and in a number of projects that I was involved with at the time, and certainly I would impute, given the facts here, that it was the same. Services were rendered, and for those services, fees were paid to parties or partners in country. They had incurred costs, and so they were remunerated based on actual work done. Over and above that, there were awards, usually for free, of shareholdings. At the time of the award, there was no value in these projects. And it was almost irrelevant, not entirely, but it was almost irrelevant the size of that initial award. Because as these projects proceed, the costs quickly ratchet up. And the practice certainly was that the partners would need to contribute on a like-for-like basis. Negotiations were tough, and the best negotiators from a local partner's point of view might have retained a minimal non-dilutable interest, and typically that was around 5% that they wouldn't go. But that would be a good negotiator on the other side. In reality, the dilutionary effect of local partners not being able to contribute over time would have eroded any award made. At the point in which this acquisition was made, however, was the eye of the storm in the industry, and two significant events that happened immediately prior to that, which is borne out by the geological field reports in the early part of 2008, which as an entrepreneur, that was an absolute aha moment. And so buying out Pentler at this time saved BSGR, would have saved, had the project gone ahead, an enormous amount of money if they had intention of buying out at a later date.
So what was exactly the consideration for that amount to be paid by BSGR and for the shares?
Can you repeat the question?
What was the consideration? What was expected from Pentler in exchange for these payments and for the shares?
I don't believe there was any expectation other than for the return their share certificates and have them cancelled. They were buying shares back from the company.
So you don't know what services were provided by Pentler, right?
I don't believe that this acquisition that I'm referring to in paragraph 69 has anything to do with services rendered. This is to do with purchase of shares. Thank you.
It's an agreement between Pentler and Madame Mamadi Touré. And it was signed on the 20th of February 2006, 6 days after Pentler was granted 17.65% in BSGR Guinea. And Pentler granted 5% in BSGR Guinea to Madame Mamadi Touré. So Pentler granted about a third of its shareholding in BSGR Guinea to Madame Touré. Were you aware of this?
No, sir. This document, just as for the record, is in French, so I sadly can't understand what has been said. But I was not aware. I've been asked to be an expert witness as to valuations, etc. So as to the content of the case, I can't help you.
According to claimant, Madame Touré was under the protection of the President Conté, and according to respondent, Madame Touré was his fourth wife. Madame Touré was 24 at the time, and she had no experience in the mining sector. So what kind of services could Madame Touré provide?
Sir, I can't help you.
Are you sure that Pentler was not providing corruption services?
So again, I have no idea what the relationship was between Pentler, Madame Touré, between Pentler and BSGR. I was not privy to that. I'm not involved in the company. I have been called upon to give an opinion as I reflected in my report.
So how can you affirm that there was nothing surprising in Pentler's remuneration if you don't know what services were provided?
Because I know what they were buying. They were buying shares into what was recently announced as a potentially 1.1 billion ton deposit. And maybe what we could do, I don't know if it's possible, to put up on the screen the report from the field geologist. I believe it was in February 2008 by Ian Bryanson. It's Appendix 3 to my report.
Sorry, Madam President, maybe we can turn to that later, after the examination of Mr. Ferreira.
We can come back and redirect, or the tribunal will ask to see this report, absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay.
And you can pursue what's your question.
So to make the point in summary, this was they had discovered what the geologist conservatively estimated as 1 billion tons when he went to field in February in 2008, supported by aeromagnetic evidence and supported by what he'd seen on the field. If I take what was paid to Pentler, the $22 million for their 17%, and we gross that up, it implies that the project was worth $125 million at the time. By my calculation, at a minimum, this project was $300 million at the time. And if you had spent another $10 million or so in drilling, I believe that this project would have been, if it had been confirmed by drilling, worth close to $1 billion. So can I just finish on this?
Sure.
The people who had access to this information in February 2008 saw an unbelievable opportunity, in my view. If I was in their position, I would also try and buy these shares as soon as I could.
And did BSGR needed Pentler to know about the Simandou project?
I've got no idea.
Wasn't it a world-class iron ore project that was known in the industry?
Zagata?
A first-class iron ore project known...
Which one are you referring to?
Simandou.
Simandou at the time was purported to have an interesting discovery. If you go back into the annual reports of Rio Tinto, the first time there was any mention of Simandou, I believe, was in the 2007 annual report, where they reference a little bit of exploration expenditure that was to be made into Simandou. The only time that was understood to be a world-class asset was when Rio Tinto used Simandou as part of their defense to the BHP takeover. And the world in mining stood up and were agog at the claim that Rio Tinto believed they could add between 9 and 11 million tons of iron ore to their inventory at the time. So in 2008, certainly when this acquisition was made, I don't believe that that information was already publicly available.
And do you know if Pentler had any specific knowledge of Simandou?
There was knowledge in the industry with regards to some information. So miners, drillers, arriving at geological or mining conferences would talk and say, we found something interesting. Yes, it's magnetite, or no, it's hematite. It's deep, it's wide. It was chit-chat. But certainly, the important information that would have attested to this project would not have been available readily to anybody. It would be not understandable to the layperson either. You might have had drill logs hidden away in databases which would need to be compiled through a GIS platform to render the information useful, to get an understanding of what was there. So as much as there would have been chit-chat, any serious investor wouldn't take that much notice of that, because this was the talk around town about many projects, whether it was Simandou or Sundance or our own project or wherever else at the time. You can't place a lot of relevance on that level of discussion.
So BSGR had access to this knowledge. It didn't need Pentler, right?
No, why? That's not what I said. I have no idea if there was a leak from Rio Tinto about this information. Given my knowledge of Rio Tinto and its practices, I would be surprised that this would happen. This is information that is very carefully guarded during an exploration process.
So coming back to the relationship between Pentler and Mamadi Touré, as an expert, assuming hypothetically that the facts I said about Mrs. Touré were correct, would you be concerned about what Pentler was doing?
Could you repeat what you're alleging I'm supposed to hypothetically respond to?
Do you still have Exhibit R184?
No.
It's under tab 14.
Oh, sorry.
So this is
a French document you're referring to.
Yes.
Yes.
This is a letter whereby Pentler granted a 5. Would you be concerned about what Pentler was doing with Mamadi Touré?
So if you're asking me to comment on an expert in corruption practices, I can't help you. I'm not an expert in corruption practices. I'm aware of legislation, increasingly so passed in recent years, post this period we're talking about, which places greater onus on companies investing in places around the world and with people of influence. I can't help you with regards to this case and to these parties involved. I'm sorry.
But you are an expert in local partners, right?
I'm not an expert in local partners. I believe I'm an expert in understanding what it takes to take a project from discovery through to developing the project. So that may include the use of local partners, but it also includes the use and understanding of the right geologists and the right understanding of markets and distribution channels. So I'm not an expert in local partners.
And this transaction, whereby Pentler was granting 5% shareholding in BSGR Guinea to Madame Mamadi Touré, the fourth wife of the president, does that transaction look normal to you?
So you're asking me to confirm relationships between parties, and you're asking me to confirm that Madame Touré was somebody of influence. I can't give any comment as to that.
Could you now turn to tab 14, please?
See that? And that is one of the documents you have studied. For the record, it is Exhibit C0331. And maybe it can be shown to Mr. Ferreira. It is not in the hearing bundle, but has been replied to. So you have to give it. Thank you. Sure. But regardless, could you please have a look at this? Could you help us where you see the services you just described to Madam President? Could you please help us and identify the services that you just described to Madam President in this document, which is called the Services and Cooperation Agreement?
So it would appear in this agreement that under paragraphs 3, there's reference to the services that we provided.
Yeah, could you help me here? What is meant by Pendler agrees to offer BSGMM its deal flow in mining, infrastructure, engineering and telecommunications sector on a good faith first offer basis. Though nothing contained in this agreement shall imply exclusivity, obligations or formal right of first refusal on either party. What type of services are those?
So a local partner may have knowledge about not only the target that you're working on, but they may be aware of potential other resources and other opportunities in the country. So in our case, on one of our projects, we were busy doing some exploration work, and we had a similar clause in our agreements with a party in a different country, and they were aware of somebody wanting to sell a gold prospecting license. And so they introduced us to this party, and we went off and investigated. So there would be these partners with their ear to the ground would come across opportunities offered by other people, other companies trying to get out, who've tried a bit of exploration work, have run out of cash and looking for the next partner. And so there were those types of opportunities that were often shown around. And what you would want to do is that your partner that you have chosen, you wanted them to show them to you first. And it was an attempt to try and get the first bite at the cherry of any other opportunities or new opportunities that might be available in the country.
Can you please look at clause 4? and it states that it concerns consideration, and it states that the parties hereby agree to provide consideration to the other party for their respective cooperation as they may agree upon from time to time on a case-by-case basis. How does this connect with the share arrangement you have seen earlier?
It's unrelated. So if they had a particular share, if a partner had a particular share in a project that we might already be engaged in, if another opportunity arose, depending on how much value they provide in introducing that second opportunity, there would be a negotiation around their participation into that, if at all. And there'd be a range starting from a simple introductory fee all the way through to them participating in the negotiation and putting in some capital of their own to try and secure the transaction.
But if you look to the timing of this document, it says it enters into force retroactively as of the 15th of October 2005. There's the same period that the research permits are being granted. And thereafter you see the letter, which I may not talk in with the green light, that has been issued on the 14th of February 2006. So are they then doing two things at the same time? Providing the services you saw in the deal flow in paragraph 3.1, and unrelated to that, as you just stated, they provided other local partner services, as you described earlier.
Sorry, so can you just confirm? So you're wanting to know if they were providing the services as suggested under paragraph 3, and that simultaneously they may be doing introductions and get remunerated for them as described under paragraph 4?
Yeah, my question is to you, not.
I'm trying to just clarify your question.
I have the similar question is, so you have two types of services, and according to your testimony.
Yes.
The services you see in paragraph 3.1.
Yep.
There's a deal flow services, if I may call it, and deal flow in mining, infrastructure, engineering, and telecommunications sector. That's one thing. And other type of services are what you call the local partner communication introduction services.
Yes, there would be, depending on the partner and the opportunity, that some of them may have their ear to the ground, introduce projects to you. Others would only do specific services, rendering infrastructure and logistical support. So there'd be a range of. In this instance, I'm not aware of what was introduced by Pentler to BSGR or what services that were rendered. But in general, as a structure, these agreements were signed as the relationship would have started earlier on, and you would have explored relationships with a number of parties going into a country. And you may have that relationship with 2 or 3 service providers. And as time goes on, and as you find your feet, some of the service providers drop out, and you don't need them anymore. And so you move along and you progress. And as they mature in this sort of period of courtship in the relationship, you discover at some point, well, we need to put a document in place. And so you sign the document and you continue. Some of those relationships then don't continue and you have to get out of the relationship. Others do continue and they move very quickly. And soon you discover that the agreement you signed just a few months ago is no longer valid. And so there's catch-up that needs to happen from the paperwork point of view. Certainly that is our experience. It's a fast-moving space. As entrepreneurs, you're focusing on the deal, you're focusing on the relationship, you're focusing on trying to determine whether this project has value. You're trying to, as an in-country manager, support justification for capital coming from the parent company to continue with this process. It's a very fast-moving, very fluid environment. And documents between parties on the ground are often scribbled down, cut and paste from lawyers, previous agreements signed off on the fly. It's not a well-oiled machine. It's a mess, to be honest, as to how it's worked, but people try their best to progress the project on an incremental basis.
Monsieur, if I may, a related question.
We're now going to take a 15-minute break. During the break, please do not speak to anyone about your testimony, and the best way of doing this is not to speak at all. Fine. Are we ready to continue, Mr. Ferreira? You're ready? Mr. Sterner, est-ce que je peux vous donner la parole?
Bien sûr, merci beaucoup. Nous n'avons plus de questions. Nous remettons.
We have no further questions, and we'd like to thank Professor Vandenberg, who helped us to make haste, and we have no further questions.
In redirect examination.
Only one very short matter, with your permission, Madam President. Mr. Ferreira, could you first look at the appendix to your report, which should appear after the signature page?
This is the list of appendices.
Yes, sorry,
Yes.
yes. It's an attachment which is the list of appendices,
Yes,
exactly.
Got it.
Just so we can clear up a housekeeping point, you referred in your evidence to Appendix 3, which is a field report. You recall that?
Correct.
Just for the tribunal's note, in the actual, the way it's been filed, 3 and 4 have been turned round. So the tribunal may find the document actually as attachment 4. So that, I just want to clear up that confusion. Having done that, let's focus on the document which is listed at 3 and which you referred to in your evidence being the field report.
Yes.
I think at one stage in your evidence you asked for the report to be put up on the screen.
Correct.
Because you had something you wanted to say about it.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to give you the opportunity to do so. So could we put that on the screen, please?
Is it possible to do that report and the second one, which is reasons, under the list of appendices, it will be 5, report by Ian Bryanson and Graham Greenaway titled Reasons for Moving Dual Rigs to the Southern Concession.
Do you want them on the screen at the
Could I
same
have
time,
that one
or
first, so the second one first, if possible?
Mr. Burston can manage anything.
Yes, that's correct.
Would you like to tell the tribunal whatever it is you wanted to say about this?
I certainly would. This is a a more formal reasoning for why drill rigs were going to be moved from the northern concession, where they had initially planned to do some drill work, following up on an aeromagnetic survey that was done and highlighting some drill targets. The geologists here describe pretty much an unexciting discoveries in the north relating to finding magnetite, which is the not interesting part of the family of iron ore deposits. But what I'd like to do is, if you could just go down to, there's a slide, so a bit further down. Okay, that's there. The resolution is not great here, but what I'm trying to show that this is which we call a massif. So the surrounding countryside is pretty flat, and then there's this ridge that runs from the bottom left to top right. And you might be able to just see a little red line going up, so that from the bottom in the center of the slide, passing a little yellow marker, just to the left of the yellow marker going up, and then the red line is on top of the ridge, and there are 3 further yellow markers. That's correct.
I think we can provide you, I think we've got a little laser pen, if that would help you.
That would be
Do we
useful.
still have that?
Don't worry.
Thank you, sir. You have my personal undertaking. I just thought it might help the witness and the tribunal if you can point precisely at what you're talking about.
I think so far we have well followed the red line and the 5 yellow markers, actually.
All right, so this geology report refers to work that was done in the north, saying that drilling was done, and where they did do drilling, it coincided with drilling in the valleys and not up on a ridge. And so they were initially a little skeptical that the aeromagnetic work up in the north was going to be successful, quite rightly so. Why they did any drilling up there, I'm not sure. The south, however, coincides with this ridge, and the aeromagnetic signature would have been from the left to the right of this ridge of roughly about 4 kilometers. Sorry, roughly about 8 kilometers in length. And in sort of local parlance in this area, these are referred to as Iron Mountains. And so the local population would have said, that's the Iron Mountain, because it's red in color and there's iron discovered there. It also would look similar, I suspect, in the Simandu blocks 1 to 4. I suspect it would be a similar kind of ridge as there is throughout the West African regions where there are sizable deposits. They are what geologists call structurally controlled. The geology and the mineralogy is pretty well defined and continuous and homogeneous. It's relative speaking, because there are gaps, etc. in between. It's dissimilar to gold mining, etc., where reefs can come and they swell up and they disappear. In something like iron ore, once you've got it and you found it, you know it. And you use 2 principal techniques. The first is aeromagnetic survey. The analogy is an X-ray. If you X-ray a human body, the bone will show up. And so you do that to pick up the bone structure, which is magnetite. It's magnetic. It's the unexciting part of iron ore. You can make iron from it. It's expensive. You've got to crush it and mill it. It's a very expensive part. What you're looking for is the flesh around the bone. So the magnetite, over many tens and hundreds of million years, oxidizes and creates hematite. Magnetite is gray, hematite is red. It's rusted, to use common terminology. Once you've discovered the bone structure, therefore, what you want to do, and you can use that by aeromagnetic survey, they fly an aeroplane over it and they collect data and they process it, and so there's in the database within BSGR Vale group, all that structure and information. I've looked through some of it. It's no use going through the detail here. But the bone structure is clearly there. In the north, they didn't find the flesh. In the south, we have Ian Bryson, who in February 2008, which is the next report I'll show in a moment, he goes and he walks across this and he cannot believe what he sees. In most of the surrounding area, it's covered by topsoil. But where it does, the rocks show, or outcrop, as geologists call it, you can see it and you can feel it and you can touch it and you can very clearly see this is magnetite. This red line appears to be a subsequent visit that Ian Bryson, together with, I would believe, his superior, Graham Greenaway, do a follow-up visit, and they walk up the hill and walk along the top of the ridge. And as is described in this report, the second report, the reasons for moving the drill rigs, they notice hematite, the nice juicy red stuff, all along that ridge. So that gets, as a geologist, I'm not a geologist, but as somebody who understands a bit of this will get your heart racing. So go back, I believe that this report was written in, that's correct, March 2008. It's a follow-up visit. It doesn't, in this official report, say anything about the projected size. And I presume that this would have been more widely distributed. The real exciting part is if we can now go to the geologist's field working notes when he visited Zogotha in February 2008. So if you could just go scroll slowly down, just stop there. So this is a Technicolor lithological representation, meaning the types of rocks identified and put in. So the colors represent the types of rocks discovered. What's important here is you'll see 4.8 kilometers strike length is the amount of work mapped. So mapping, once you've got the bone structure, mapping then goes to try and find where this fleshy bits are. And you would look at where it's outcropping or the rocks are showing, and in some instances you might dig a trench to find the rocks, but you try and identify that this fleshy bit is actually attached. And so they had mapped by February 2008 4.8 kilometers along this geological phenomena. If we go down a bit further, you will see an overlay now of the X-ray, so-called, the magnetic anomaly, which is that sort of protruding white line showing the bone structure. And there you can see, in red, colored in, is where they've marked and discovered the fleshy magnetite bits. So this is all starting to hang together quite nicely. If you go further down, this is now a rendition of using different filters on the aeromagnetic data set and trying to color what is non-magnetic. So the non-magnetic bit here is the purple bit. And why that's exciting is because hematite is non-magnetic. So it looks as if there's huge amounts of fleshy bits hanging off this magnetite bone structure here. If you go further down to this paragraph, this says it all. And I'm going to read it. The mapping is showing the maximum width of a mapped outcrop. So all those squiggly red lines, the maximum width going diagonally in the picture from bottom left to top right is 3.7 kilometers. And the minimum is 2 kilometers. So there's, let's call it minimum 2 kilometers wide fleshy bits hanging off. The approximate height difference between the flat area and the top of the HW bearing mountain, so this is HW is hematite, the red fleshy bit, is 400 meters. So you would have had erosion around the area over millions of years. The bit that's competent should be all iron-bearing, and that's 400 meters high, as we saw from those previous slides with that sort of picture with the path going up. So if we want to take the following assumptions, and here the geologist is panicking, extremely dangerous at this stage because he hasn't drilled and he hasn't confirmed this, and he's a nervous technical individual. He said, assuming that the average depth of the deposit is 100 meters, we know it's 400 meters from surface to top, but he's only taking 100 meters assumption. He said, and assuming that the width is 1,000 meters, and if you look at the first sentence, we know that the minimum was 2 kilometers, 2,000 meters. So it's taken 25% of the depth of this deposit and half of the minimum width as they've identified in the fleshy bits, and the length of 3,750 meters, and then the density of 3, which is for iron ore. He says there's potential for 1.1 billion tons of iron ore. He's discounted and discounted and discounted again this occurrence, and he's called it as 1.1 billion tons. He goes on to cover himself and saying drilling will need to be confirmed this, and again emphasize that these are broad and loose assumptions, but give one some idea of the possible potential of the area. Further, he adds, obviously there's also potential along the remaining 4 kilometers of strike, read bone structure, that we've already identified with this aeromagnetic survey. Another 50% discount of the potential that might be there. This is a little fisherman hooking into a whale. It's an absolute aha moment. And this was February 2008. Simultaneous to this time, negotiations around iron ore prices settled on contract basis had just gone up 70%. On top of 2 previous years of, I think, if I correctly remember, 35 and 45% jump in iron ore prices. So you've got a runaway pricing scenario, and then you discover this unbelievably fantastic deposit. And it could not have been assumed that the geologists would have known this was there. Even if hundreds or 50s or 10 years ago we knew this was the Iron Mountain. And because the geologists went off, as so often you do, into the northern side and did your drilling there first because easy accessible, and the magnetic signature showed that there was actually iron ore there. So it all needs to hang together. If this was gold deposits we were looking at this stage, you would not get excited because gold does not have, generally speaking, a continuity of structure. But iron ore, like bauxite, like some coal deposits, are different. Once you've defined something and you've found it, it generally speaking continues. There are exceptions where it can disappear. And so this is why this geologist is caught between his technical education of not calling this too early because he's got to go and drill and confirm everything, and looking at this and saying, I cannot believe it. It's an unbelievable discovery. And so coming off the mountain, he would have gone back, and if he'd reported to me, I would have known we would have an unbelievably good project, which would have had the potential to stand alone on its own and justify the infrastructure required to build a mine and a railway line to the coast. And so, based on this, of the 1.1 billion tons, and if you go one more slide, paragraph down, where it says, other features of interest is the Kanga field, which is another even better quality product than the hematite that I've spoke to you about. he said the hematite classed inside, which have been assayed at 63.7% iron. That is of the highest quality iron ore you can find. Iron ore is not like precious metals and base metals, which you can refine down to get a good quality product, almost irrespective of what's in the ground. Iron ore, you're reliant on what nature has offered you. And at 63.7%, you know that there are very low deleterious elements or contaminants of phosphorus, silicon, and alumina. And so you would have had two things running around your head. One is, as an industrial mineral, this product is eminently sellable to the market. It would likely be able to command a premium to benchmark prices, because the alternative is to go with Australian iron ore at lower quality with more deleterious elements. The only other place in the world where you see this quality is in Brazil. And so you would see that this quality product plus the size. And from a valuation perspective, you go, how many tons have you got? What is the potential revenue or earnings you can generate per ton? You've got an enormous amount, 1 billion tons. You know that's a project maker. You've got a product which is good quality, and so you know that your revenue per ton is great. And then thirdly, you're looking for a good address. And knowing at this stage that Rio Tinto was spending a lot of time, and that there was talk that they found things interesting, you had a sense that you were in a good address. You're also in a good address because you're part of, geologically, this fantastic greenstone belt that runs through this region. And Guinea is blessed with unbelievable mineral potential, both in iron ore and other minerals like bauxite. And so the address is good, the size is fantastic, and the quality is, relative to recent discoveries prior to this, unequal. Based on that, I would go off and either try and get my partner to put in as much money and to drill this thing out as quickly as possible. And as you, from the next report, when they talk about moving the drill rigs from north to south, the cost of drilling the 30,000 meters the budget the team in country would have asked for would have been in the order of $6 million to do the preliminary drill work on this deposit. So you want them to put in the $6 million, come along with you, or if you thought they weren't going to do that, then you'd say, well, we're going to buy you out, because this is a potentially fantastic opportunity to earn as much of it as possible.
Thank you. I have no further questions for Mr. Ferreira, Madam President.
A long answer to your question.
I was really affording him an opportunity to say what he wanted to say.
It was interesting. It gives us a sense of what the project could have been. Do my colleagues have questions? Let me just see. I think we've covered what I had. Yeah, we had the field reports, but that we have just heard you on this. This is a question for council. Do I understand that we do not have in the record a services contract other than C331, which to me deals probably with other opportunities, and on the one hand, and on the other hand, we also have R182 that deals with this project, and that is all. We don't have another services contract with respect to this project.
I think that's right.
Yes.
Off the top of my head, if I've forgotten something, we'll correct it on
You
Monday
can
morning. But I think
Tell
that's
us
right.
on Monday morning. That is the way I understand it at this stage, yes.
Et du côté de la défenseure, on peut confirmer aussi.
Mr. Rostov, for respondent, we can say that these are the two relevant documents. The President, yes, these are the service agreements.
Yeah, and you have been asked questions about 183, I think, or 184, and R24. No, so I have no further questions, Mr. Ferreira. Thank you very much for your help. Yes, you are. And I suppose we are soon free to go as well.
Madam President,
Is
yes.
there anything that you wish to add?
Only two very short points. First, the tribunal will be aware that there is another expert report for which the attendance of the witness was not required, and therefore he's not attending orally. The second point, if I may, on a personal note, I may not be present next week, but I hope the tribunal will understand that no discourtesy at all is intended. I have other professional commitments, and certainly no discourtesy to my colleagues either. So I just wanted to be clear that my non-attendance is not due to anything else. And I thank the tribunal and my colleagues for their respective courtesies.
We will regret your absence, and we thank you for your cooperation all of this week. Is there anything that, est-ce qu'il y a quelque chose que la...
The President, would respondent like to add anything before we end our hearing today? Mr. Ostrov, nothing else. Thank you. The President, in that case, I would like to thank all of you for cooperation for the duration of the week. So we will finish today and we will resume Monday morning at 9:30. And I hope that in the meantime, you will be able to agree on the timing for next week in such a way as to include a slot to hear Mr. Avidon. I wish you a good weekend, perhaps not free of work, but with some rest time.